Before we begin, welcome to the channel, a small corner of the internet where we tell true-to-heart stories about family, forgiveness, and the quiet, ordinary heroism of setting boundaries. If you find meaning in narratives that mix raw honesty with hope, you're in the right place. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter, and if this story resonates with you, share it with someone who might need the reminder that self-respect counts too. Today's story is titled, "At my sister's wedding, my parents demanded my penthouse. I refused, Mom slapped me. I chose revenge." My name is Madison Hayes, and this is how a celebration turned into a reckoning, how a single sound in a chandeliered ballroom, one hard, ringing slap, cut through years of polite denial like a bell that refuses to stop. Picture a grand room made to flatter memory, white roses domed like clouds along the railings, gold ribbon looping the backs of chairs, chandeliers that drizzled light like champagne. 200 people gathered at round tables, their voices braided into a bright hum. A band tuned a hopeful melody. It should have been beautiful. It was. Beauty can sit calmly beside cruelty. I learned that early. I was standing by the far window when it happened, near a mirror that multiplied the room into infinity. My mother's hand rose, not quite theatrical, not quite impulsive, somewhere in that charged middle ground where the body moves for the heart without asking permission. The crack came clean as glass splitting. My cheek flamed. And then the smallest thing took flight. A diamond earring, tracing an arc no one intended and everyone would remember, the way a fallen leaf can announce the season more clearly than the whole forest. In certain moments, time is a patient designer. It chooses the colors, dims the room just so, lets the air grow heavy, waits. The camera shutters clicked and then didn't. The waiters stalled mid-step, the silver lids over salmon plates trembling. Even the children went quiet as if recess had been canceled by God. I did not touch my face. I did not speak yet. I was the stillness testing whether it could hold. Call it an origin point if you want, the minute a life tells you enough. For 32 years, I'd been the daughter who wore navy silk to black tie events, who stood a little too straight, laughed a little too late, who put in 80-hour weeks in cities that never learned my middle name. I was unremarkable to my family, in the way a load-bearing wall is unremarkable until someone tries to hollow it out and hang a chandelier there. They had always liked the light more than the structure. That morning, 3 hours before the ceremony, I arrived at the Grand View Hotel and took in the arrangements I'd helped pay for, $50,000 wired without thank you, or we couldn't have done it without you. The roses didn't know whose account they had sprouted from. Flowers have the gift of being blameless. Madison, finally, my mother had said, eyes doing what eyes do when they're measuring not a person but the idea of one. That dress, couldn't you choose something more feminine? It was a tone meant for shaping girls into the sorts of women who tuck themselves into a corner of their own lives and call it love. I smoothed the silk the way you soothe a startled horse. "Good morning to you too, Mom," I said. "Sophia looks beautiful." She did. My sister glowed in a lace like spun sugar. She had always been our family's love letter to tradition. People looked at her and relaxed, as if she were a promise that the world would not change too fast. "Family comes first," my father liked to say, an uncomplicated sentence that can be wielded like a coat in winter or a rope in water. He used it as both. "Don't be difficult with seating," he called over. "Don't reorganize everything the way you do." I set a crooked centerpiece straight and did not mention the divorced couple placed together or the business rivals assigned an arm's reach apart. Each person in the room had a hunger. Some wanted approval, some wanted proximity, some wanted dessert. I wanted, and there's the scandal in it, peace bought with my own money. There is a peculiar American myth about women at a certain rung. If they are successful, they paid for it with softness they'll never get back. The myth keeps them apologizing for the bills they settled that no one else could afford. At that point, I was vice president of development at Hayes Capital, the kind of job people assume belongs to a man whose hair is saltier than his language. I led our Asia-Pacific expansion, learned to sleep with the light on in airports, and taught my voice how to carry into rooms where names on the wall meant more than names in the chair. My penthouse, the one with windows that opened the city to me like a map I had earned the right to read, had become the physical proof of a promise I made to myself at 22. I would build a life where belonging was not rented from approval. I did not tell them the square footage, or that I'd paid cash after closing Singapore, or that Architectural Digest had inquired without my prompting. When you grow up misunderstood, you learn the difference between showing receipts and living your records. I had been practicing silence for a long time, not the silence of fear, but the silence of dignity. It sits taller. The plot against me was simple. Ambush is a cousin of surprise, and my family was celebrating both. I overheard it near the pastry table, my father's voice, my mother's incantation. After the toast, we'll announce the gift. She'll be proud to perform generosity. She won't make a scene. They had prepared a place for my compliance beside the wedding cake. They had measured my life and found it perfectly proportioned to their needs. At the reception, my father rose, glass chiming like a preacher's bell. He spoke of love and of the blessings we should count, then pivoted with a smile theatrically broad. He said, "Carol and I want to give Sophia and Brian something special." He pointed his hand at me the way one might point a flashlight into a cave to see whether there are bats. "We are thrilled to announce that Madison has graciously agreed to give them her city penthouse. There is a moment between laughter and applause when people decide what you have earned. I could feel the room choose. "Oh my God, Madison." Sophia breathed into a second microphone, hands clasped to chest, tears filed to perfection. "The penthouse." Cameras tilted. A wedding is a stage, and the truth always risks upstaging the couple. I stood. The room went still the way a field stills before weather. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, voice even. My father tried to smile me into place. "Your penthouse, sweetheart. It's my property," I said, still even, "and I haven't agreed to anything." You would be amazed how quickly a crowd can be deputized. Aunties and cousins took turns at the microphone none of them held, speaking from the amphitheater of their faces. How could she, on her sister's day? Don't be selfish. You don't even have a family to fill it. It stung in the way a splinter stings, not fatal but intimate. When you're single at 32, strangers assign you every absence but the truth. Sometimes you choose the open window over the crowded room. That was when I noticed a red dot blinking on a phone propped at a table, the kind of small light that announces big consequences. Live, it said, to anyone who cared to read. The internet had already pulled a chair. My phone buzzed. MC, the initials only 2 people in that ballroom knew. Marcus Chen. Mentor. Boss. A man who had built his name from nothing and signed it where people used to sigh. His message was a single sentence and a generosity. "Your call. Say the word." No one in my family knew he owned 40% of my father's company. No one knew a clause lay sleeping in my compensation package, a thin line on a thick contract that said, in essence, "We protect our people, even from the hands that raised them." In preparation for a crisis I had not believed would ever come, Marcus had written a promise into the paperwork. In the event of coercion or duress to transfer this asset, the company will intervene. Sometimes salvation is a legal subparagraph. Sometimes it is a person standing beside the words. "Put that phone away," my mother snapped, striding across the dance floor, voice amplified by the speaker she didn't remember she held. "This is family time." Apparently it's also public entertainment, I said softly, nodding toward the red dot. Maybe it was mercy that I warned them it wasn't only the roses watching. She came closer. Rage is theatrical when it forgets there is an audience. Give your sister the keys, she said. Now. No, I said, and meant it in all the ways a person can mean a word. And then her hand lifted and fell. After, I walked to the earring glinting on the marble like a stubborn star, knelt, and steadied it back into my ear. I told my sister I hoped her marriage would bring her joy. I picked up my clutch and I left without hurry, like a woman stepping out of the weather into her own house. In the elevator, I pressed Marcus's name. He answered as if he'd been listening to my breath from miles away. Green light, I said. Understood, he said. Are you okay? I touched the heat on my cheek and watched the floors blink past. Activate the contingency, I said. And Marcus, bring the shareholder agreement, the one my father never read. Some stories turn on a twist. Mine turned on a boundary. Either way, the hinge was the same. The courage to close one door so another could open without apology. In America, weddings are often less about two people pledging a life together and more about the stage they provide for everyone else's expectations. That morning, I drove through the city still blinking awake, its skyscrapers outlined in pale gold, and arrived at the Grand View Hotel by 8. 3 hours early, but I had learned long ago that preparation is both armor and disguise. The ballroom was breathtaking in a way only money can choreograph. White roses in perfect domes, gilded runners along the tables, crystal glasses aligned as if they'd rehearsed. I had contributed $50,000 to make this happen. Yet, as the florist adjusted one last bouquet and the catering staff rehearsed their ballet of trays, I knew no one would mention it. To give in silence was the role they had written for me, helpful but unseen. Madison, finally. My mother's voice carried the practiced annoyance of someone who expects you to apologize simply for existing. She scanned me top to bottom. That dress, navy silk, you look like you're walking into a board meeting, not your sister's wedding. I smoothed the lines of the gown. It was elegant, modest, something I could wear into any room without shame. My armor. Good morning to you, too, Mom, I said lightly. Sophia looks radiant. Her lips curled. A proper bride, she glows. The comparison was familiar, worn smooth from overuse. Sophia, sweet, soft, the embodiment of tradition. Madison, too sharp, too independent, too unwilling to soften her edges to fit the mold. Families carve roles the way sculptors carve stone, but they rarely ask if the statue ever wanted to be chiseled. My father, overseeing the placement of guests, called out, Madison, can you check the seating? But don't reorganize everything like you always do. I glanced at the chart, divorced couples cruelly paired, rivals set side by side. My instincts urged me to fix it, but I bit back the words. In this family, truth was always repackaged as being difficult. They didn't know, because I never told them, that I was vice president of development at Hayes Capital, steering our expansion across Asia-Pacific. 10 years of red-eye flights, 80-hour weeks, deals splashed across the Financial Times. But in my parents' eyes, this wasn't achievement, it was deviation. Too career-focused, too masculine, too much like the son they never had. Family comes first, Madison, my father said, moving beside me as I straightened a crooked centerpiece. You'll understand when you have one of your own, if you ever settle down. The jab was subtle but sharp, like a needle slipped into cloth. I forced a smile. Of course, Dad. I'll make sure everything's perfect for Sophia. Not everyone can be as lucky as Sophia, finding true love so young, Aunt Patricia added, her tone half amused, half scolding. Around us whispers slithered. Still no ring. All that time in the city and she's alone. At least Carol has Sophia, grandchildren soon. My cousin Derek grinned. "Hey, Madison, maybe if you spent less time in boardrooms and more time in normal rooms, you'd have a date today." Laughter rippled. I wanted to tell them about the men who couldn't stomach dating someone who outturned them, about the silence of coming home late to a view that was magnificent but mine alone. But I didn't. Explaining would be like offering my heart for them to grade. "She's always been too picky," my mother announced, as if it were a medical condition. I adjusted another centerpiece, my movements precise, my expression calm. Silence was safer than defending myself. Later, during the mingling before the ceremony, Aunt Sally tilted her head, smile dripping with sugar. "How's that little apartment in the city? Must be cozy." "It's a penthouse," I corrected quietly. The group burst into laughter. "Oh, Madison," Aunt Sally said, wiping tears, "you and your big dreams." "She likes to exaggerate," Sophia chimed, drifting over in her lace gown. "Last year she said she was buying a Tesla. Can you imagine?" I did buy one, I thought, though I only smiled. It was parked outside. "Madison's always been ambitious," my mother sighed, making the word sound like a flaw. "Too ambitious," Uncle Tom added. "Nothing wrong with modest living." At that moment, my phone buzzed with a message from the concierge. Confirmation of tomorrow's delivery to my 500-square-foot penthouse, paid for in cash after Singapore. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a feature in Architectural Digest. Proof, waiting quietly for me that I wasn't the ghost they imagined. But I said nothing. Sometimes silence isn't defeat, it's discipline. By the window, I watched the skyline where my tower stood taller than their doubts. 10 years of sacrifice, of missed birthdays, of loneliness sharpened into resilience. That penthouse wasn't just real estate, it was testimony. If I handed it over like a party favor, I would erase the girl who had clawed her way here. Invisible. That was my role, until they tried to make me disposable. A penthouse can be mistaken for mere square footage, marble countertops, glass walls, and ceilings that seem too far away to ever touch. But to me, it was more than bricks and steel. It was a decade of nights when I fell asleep at my desk under fluorescent lights. Mornings when I boarded planes while the rest of the world still dreamed. It was proof that invisible labor could leave visible marks on the skyline. 10 years. That's what it took to climb from entry-level analyst to vice president of development at Hayes Capital. 10 years of sharpening my instincts, negotiating across languages and cultures, saying yes to projects others called impossible. I remember those endless weeks in Singapore, spreadsheets glowing on my laptop like neon prayers, the deal that sealed my independence. When the ink dried, I didn't just buy property, I carved out sanctuary. Sanctuary. The word kept circling me, even as family voices tugged like anchors. A woman alone at 32 isn't always seen as complete in American families. There's a myth we tell here. That success is incomplete unless it wears a ring. My relatives subscribed to that myth with fervor, clucking about grandchildren like unpaid debts. And so every accomplishment, every promotion, every headline was measured against the absence of a diamond on my finger. They laughed about my little apartment, called me ambitious as though it were a diagnosis, rolled their eyes at the Tesla I parked outside. In that ballroom, laughter was their favorite currency, and I was their favorite exchange. But I knew the truth. I was not simply surviving in that city. I was shaping it. My name might not have been etched into the skyline, but the deals I closed funded the towers that gleamed at night. Still, their words stung, not for what they meant, but for what they revealed. That after all this time, they saw me as unfinished. That in their eyes, my worth depended on my ability to hand over pieces of myself for their comfort. That penthouse, my quiet rebellion against their narrative, was now the prize they had decided to claim. I thought of the mornings when my assistant would text me photos from the windows. the sunrise over a city wrapped in gold, captioned with a simple line, "Your sanctuary awaits, boss." She knew it wasn't just an apartment. It was the only place I wasn't a disappointment, the only space where the word too much didn't echo after my name. And yet, in my parents' whispers, I overheard their plan. After the toast, they would announce the gift of my penthouse to Sophia. Not a request, a declaration. They believed the public stage would corner me, that I'd be too proud to refuse. Family first, they would say, and everyone would nod. Family first, the phrase Americans love to wield like scripture, though too often it means, your needs second, your dreams last. But sanctuary isn't something you surrender without cost. That penthouse represented nights of loneliness I had endured so I could stand taller in boardrooms where no one expected me to belong. It represented the countless times I bit back tears, smiled into cameras, and carried the weight of being both underestimated and envied. To them, it was an empty space waiting to be filled. To me, it was the only space that had ever felt fully mine. I knew then, they weren't just asking for keys. They were asking me to erase myself. I overheard it not by accident, but because the truth has a way of finding the ears of those it's about to wound. My father's voice, low and conspiratorial, drifted over from the head table. "After the toast," he said, "we'll make the announcement about the penthouse." My mother's answer came wrapped in certainty, like someone describing the weather instead of another person's life. "She won't have a choice. Not in front of everyone. She's too proud to make a scene." The words settled on me like cold rain. They weren't plotting generosity, they were planning an ambush. Not a conversation, not even a request. A public unveiling of my supposed consent. A trap disguised as celebration. That's the cruel genius of social pressure. It doesn't need bars to build a cage. It only needs enough eyes, enough expectations, enough gasps rehearsed in advance. At that wedding, 200 witnesses were their arsenal. If I refused, I wouldn't just be disagreeing with my parents. I'd be framed as the villain in my sister's fairy tale. "Besides," my mother added, almost with a laugh, "what does she need a penthouse for? It's not like she has a family to fill it. Casual cruelty is its own dialect in families. It never shouts, it whispers, believing its wounds will fade unnoticed." But that line cut deeper than the slap that would come later. It wasn't just about a home. It was about erasing my legitimacy as a daughter, a woman, a person worth space. I stood still, my hand brushing the edge of a centerpiece I'd straightened earlier, and in that stillness something crystallized. For 32 years I had bent, softened, swallowed, adjusted. I had been the ghost who paid bills and made connections but never received acknowledgement. But this was different. This was a theft planned in plain sight. I thought about the architecture of coercion, how families use words like tradition and sacrifice to frame exploitation as love. How many daughters have been told to give away what they earned because someone else needed it more? How many times had I heard, family comes first, when what they meant was, your boundaries come last? In that ballroom, among the roses and champagne, I saw the blueprint of their scheme. They believed I would fold, because folding had always kept the peace. But peace is counterfeit when purchased with pieces of your soul. So I made a silent vow as their voices drifted across the room. Not this time. If they thought they could corner me into surrender with applause and champagne flutes, they had forgotten one thing. I had spent a decade learning how to stand my ground in boardrooms where millions were on the line. My resolve had been forged not in family approval, but in the crucible of being doubted, dismissed, and overlooked. What they called difficult, the world had called indispensable. And as I watched my sister glide through the room in her gown, glowing like a promise they thought I had failed to deliver, I knew. When the toast came, and when my name was summoned into their performance, I would not play my part. The stage was set for their triumph. but they had underestimated the power of one word spoken with conviction. The band fell silent when my father rose, champagne flute in hand, his smile stretched wider than truth could carry. He tapped the glass with a spoon, each chime slicing through the chatter until 200 heads turned toward him. Before we continue celebrating, he began, his voice smooth and booming through the microphone. Carol and I would like to give Sophia and Brian something special. I felt my chest tighten, the way it does when you know a storm is about to break but you're standing without shelter. My father's eyes swept the crowd, then landed on me. As you all know, family means everything to us, and there's nothing we wouldn't do for our children's happiness. Children, plural, but his gaze never left Sophia. That's why we're thrilled to announce that Madison has graciously agreed to give Sophia and Brian her city penthouse as a wedding gift. The room erupted. Gasps, applause, murmurs. Sophia pressed her hands against her chest with the kind of surprise that has been rehearsed in mirrors. "Oh my God, Madison." She breathed into her own microphone, the tears perfectly timed. "Are you serious? The penthouse?" Every head turned toward me. I stood at my table, champagne glass in hand, pulse pounding against my skin like a war drum. For a split second, the temptation was there, to plaster on a smile, to nod, to let the tide sweep me into silence. But silence is consent, and I had consented for too many years. I set the glass down and rose slowly. The applause faltered, curiosity replacing joy. "I'm sorry," I said clearly, my voice steady, carrying without need for a microphone. "What?" My father's smile flickered, then reformed as if he could will me back into compliance. "Your penthouse, sweetheart, for Sophia and Brian." "This wasn't discussed with me," I replied. Calm, professional. The kind of tone I had mastered in boardrooms where every syllable could tip a negotiation. A ripple of whispers shot across the room. Faces craned, expressions shifting. Some leaned forward, hungry for drama. Others recoiled as if I had violated some unspoken script. "Don't be selfish on your sister's day," my father snapped, still holding the microphone so everyone could hear. "Dad," I said evenly, "this is inappropriate. We can discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," my mother interjected, snatching the microphone from him. Her voice, shrill but triumphant, rang out. "It's a wedding gift from the family." "It's my property," I said, each word clipped and deliberate, "and I haven't agreed to anything." The murmurs grew louder. "How could she?" someone whispered. "On her sister's wedding day." Another voice, so selfish. Sophia's eyes glistened, weaponized innocence. "Madison," she whimpered, "I thought you wanted me to be happy." "Your happiness doesn't require my home," I replied. "It's just property." My father boomed, his voice cracking. "You can buy another one." "Then you buy her one," I answered. The ballroom gasped. Someone at the front clutched their pearls as if morality itself had just fainted. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment not as family unity but as fracture. "Come on, Madison," Aunt Sally called. "It's family." "You don't even have a family to fill it," Uncle Tom added cruelly. "Sophia needs it more." "She's starting her life," another relative chimed in. "What do you need all that space for?" The pressure mounted like a chorus rehearsed for years. Each voice was another brick laid in the wall they were building around me. But I stood, steady, hands loose at my sides. "Be reasonable," my cousin Derek shouted. "Stop being so difficult." "It's not like you can't afford another place," Aunt Patricia said, dripping sarcasm. "With your big, important job." They still didn't believe. Even now they thought the penthouse was a fantasy, some exaggeration from the ambitious daughter who never grew soft enough. "That's generous of you to assume," I said coolly. "But my financial situation isn't up for public discussion." My mother's face twisted, purple with rage. She spat into the microphone. "Everything's about money with you. Your sister's happiness should matter more than property." "If Sophia's happiness depends on taking what's mine," I replied, "perhaps we should examine that." Gasps again, sharper this time, like knives drawn. I looked around the ballroom, at clients, colleagues, strangers, and family, all of them waiting for me to collapse into the role they'd written. But I had rewritten myself long ago, and now, for the first time, I let the world see the new script. The penthouse is not available. The words hung in the air. The penthouse is not available, and for a moment it seemed as though the chandeliers themselves dimmed. Then the noise began. Murmurs swelling into whispers, whispers swelling into accusations. The kind of noise that grows when people sense they've been given permission to turn cruel. "She's cold," someone muttered. "On her own sister's wedding day," another whispered. "Selfish," Aunt Sally pronounced, shaking her head as if she were weighing sin itself. Sophia's tears spilled with surgical precision. "Madison," she said, her voice breaking for the crowd, "I thought you loved me enough to help me start my marriage." Her words were not aimed at me, they were aimed at the audience, weaving a net of pity and outrage. She played her part flawlessly, and the crowd devoured it. Poor Sophia, betrayed by her ambitious sister. But I noticed something else, something the others missed. Brian's younger brother, seated at table 6, had his phone propped up. A red circle blinked in the corner of the screen. Facebook Live. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a family ambush. This was a broadcast. My phone buzzed in my clutch. 3 missed calls from MC. Then a text. Saw the live stream. On standby, your call, say the word. Marcus Chen, my mentor, my boss, the man who owned 40% of my father's company, the man whose name was whispered in Forbes and boardrooms like a spell. To my parents, he was an unreachable figure. To me, he was one text away. I looked back at the blinking red light on that phone. My humiliation, my resistance, my family's cruelty, all of it was being fed to the internet in real time. Who knew how many had already seen my parents try to corner me? Who knew how many were screen recording? My mother slammed her fist against the microphone, her voice rising. "Give your sister the keys, Madison, now." "No," I said again, voice calm, steady. "You ungrateful girl," she spat. "After everything we've done for you, you can't do this one thing." The crowd stirred, their murmurs like a tide rising against me. Someone booed from the back. Others chimed in, "Be reasonable. It's just property. Stop embarrassing your family." I felt the pressure close in, 200 voices trying to bulldoze me into submission, yet my hands did not shake. I had faced billionaires who tried to eat me alive in conference rooms, men who thought intimidation was negotiation. I had learned to be steel wrapped in silk. I wasn't about to crumble here in front of roses and violins. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Marcus. "Your wedding is trending. Wait for my signal." I slipped the phone back into my clutch, my heart hammering, not from fear but from clarity. This was no longer a family squabble. This was spectacle. The moment when private cruelty collided with public exposure, and exposure has consequences. I glanced at my mother's face, twisted with rage, at my father's expression, pinched with disbelief, at Sophia's mask of sweetness beginning to crack. None of them realized yet how quickly the internet could turn a family drama into a corporate disaster. None of them knew that a single clause, 15, 3 in my contract, was already hovering over this room like a blade ready to fall. The ballroom was no longer theirs. It was mine. It happened so quickly that later, when I tried to replay it in my mind, it felt almost like a dream sequence slowed down for emphasis. My mother, flushed purple with fury, stormed down from the head table, her sequined gown catching the light like shattered glass. The microphone was still clutched in her hand, picking up every ragged breath. She came close enough that I could smell her perfume, too sweet, suffocating, the same brand she'd worn when she used to lecture me as a teenager about acting more ladylike. "Madison Hayes," she hissed, her voice booming through the speakers, "you will not ruin this day. You will not embarrass this family." Her hand rose before I had time to register, a blur of flesh and fury. The sound split the ballroom in two, the sharp crack of palm against cheek, amplified by the microphone bouncing off the marble walls. The sting was instant. Heat bloomed across my face, my head snapping sideways, and then came the gasp. 200 people inhaling at once, a collective sound of disbelief that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. For a moment, everything froze. The photographer's camera stilled. Waiters stopped mid-step, trays hovering in the air. Even the band had gone silent, instruments hanging like ornaments. The entire ballroom became a still frame, suspended in shock. Something small and glittering caught the light. My diamond earring, the one I had bought myself after closing the Singapore deal, my private celebration of a victory no one in this family cared to know about, spiraled through the air in slow motion before hitting the marble floor with a delicate ping. A jewel of independence, tossed aside by the force of someone else's anger. I didn't touch my cheek. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. My stillness was my answer. My mother's hand hung in the air, trembling, as though even she couldn't believe what she'd done. The microphone in her other hand picked up her uneven breathing, a strange soundtrack to a spectacle she had created. Across the mirrored wall, I saw reflections of us, me with a red mark on my cheek, her with eyes blazing, Sophia with her hands pressed dramatically to her mouth. My father was half risen from his chair, caught between intervention and complicity. I stepped forward, each heel clicking against the marble, the silence so deep that the sound echoed like gunfire. I bent down, picked up the earring, and slid it back into place. The gesture was small but deliberate, like resetting myself, reclaiming something she had tried to knock loose. Then I looked directly at my mother. "Excuse me," I said softly, but the microphone carried it across the ballroom like scripture. I turned to my sister, her bridal gown shimmering in the light, her face a perfect portrait of staged sorrow. "Congratulations, Sophia. I hope your marriage brings you joy." I picked up my clutch, adjusted my dress, and walked toward the exit with the same deliberate pace I used when leaving board meetings. Not rushing, not stumbling, just walking head high. "Madison, wait." My father's voice cracked behind me, desperation finally breaking through. But I didn't turn back. Behind me, the ballroom erupted. Voices collided, chairs scraped, someone sobbed, someone shouted. Chaos blooming where moments before there had been order. But all of it faded as the heavy doors closed behind me, shutting out the storm. In the quiet of the hallway, I pulled out my phone, the cheek still burning beneath my fingertips. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Green light," I said simply. "Understood," he replied, his tone like steel drawn from its sheath. "How long do you need?" 45 minutes to get home." "Are you hurt?" I paused, touched my cheek, then exhaled. "Nothing that won't heal. Then I'll execute the contingency, and Madison." "Yes, bring the shareholder agreement," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The one my father never bothered to read. There was a beat of silence on the line, then Marcus chuckled, low and dangerous. "With pleasure." As the elevator doors slid shut around me, I realized something. The slap was meant to humiliate me. Instead, it had freed me. 45 minutes later, as promised, Marcus Chen walked into the Grand View Hotel ballroom with the poise of a man who had spent his life turning chaos into currency. He wore an Armani suit that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, flanked by 2 attorneys carrying leather briefcases. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The air thickened, shifting from gossip to dread. My parents had no idea what was coming. To them, Marcus was just a name in business pages, the elusive CEO of one of the city's largest investment firms. They did not know he was my boss. They did not know he owned 40% of my father's company. They did not know that clause 15.3, the strange little line buried deep in my compensation contract, was now the guillotine blade hanging over their carefully built facade. "Richard," Marcus's voice carried through the ballroom, unamplified yet commanding. "I need to clarify something for everyone present." My father's face drained of color. He pushed himself halfway out of his chair, trying to maintain composure. "Mr. Chen, what an unexpected honor." But Marcus didn't look at him. He looked at Sophia in her gown, at my mother with her trembling hand still on the microphone, at the guests who had watched everything unfold. "There seems to have been some misunderstanding about Madison Hayes." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mother stiffened. "She is not simply an employee," Marcus continued. "She is vice president of development at Hayes Capital. She led the Singapore deal that netted $40 million. She built the Tokyo office, now our most profitable branch. She negotiated the Samsung partnership that your company," and here his gaze finally cut to my father, desperately wanted a piece of. Gasps filled the ballroom. My father stammered, "That's impossible. She never." "Your daughter," Marcus interrupted, "is one of the most valuable executives in this city. And the penthouse you tried to take from her, that was part of her executive compensation package, with protections against coercion." The word coercion landed like a gavel. "What protections?" My father whispered, his face clammy. Marcus nodded to one of the attorneys who placed a stack of documents on the head table. "Clause 15(3). It activates when any attempt is made to force Madison to surrender her assets under duress. Which, thanks to the live stream," he gestured toward Brian's brother, who tried and failed to hide his phone, "has now been documented for the world to see." My mother's voice rose, shrill, desperate. "This is family business. The moment you made it public," Marcus said evenly, "you made it my business." He turned slightly, addressing the guests as though they were shareholders at a meeting. "This is not about property. This is about leadership. When a man who runs a company publicly assaults his daughter's autonomy and allows his wife to strike her across the face in front of 200 witnesses, it raises serious questions about his judgment." The room went silent, the kind of silence that carries weight. I could almost hear the foundation of my father's empire groaning under the strain. Marcus leaned in, voice like a blade. "Richard, you have 48 hours to issue a public apology to Madison. You will acknowledge her achievements. You will affirm her right to her own property, and you will ensure your wife does the same. If you don't," he tapped the papers, "I call an emergency board meeting. I control 40%. The Jensen Trust controls 15%. That's a majority. You will not survive it." My mother tried to recover, her voice cracking through the microphone. "This is extortion." "No," Marcus said calmly. "Extortion was demanding your daughter's penthouse in front of 200 witnesses. This is consequence management." My father's shoulders slumped. His eyes darted to the guests, who were no longer whispering in judgment of me but staring at him with dawning horror. And in that moment, I understood something. For years, my family had treated me as invisible. But tonight, invisibility had become my greatest weapon. Because while they dismissed me, I had built something stronger, alliances, contracts, a career that could not be stripped away by applause or guilt. The balance of power had shifted. And for the first time in 32 years, I wasn't the one on trial. The fallout was immediate. You could feel the tremor ripple through the room, like glass about to shatter under pressure. The wedding reception, once a pageant of roses and chandeliers, was unraveling into a cautionary tale. Marcus's words had barely settled when phones started buzzing across the ballroom. Screens lit up with alerts, social feeds already alive with the story. Brian's brother's live stream had been shared hundreds of times before he even lowered the phone from the table. What my parents thought was a family matter had become public theater, and the audience was multiplying by the second. I wasn't in the room to see it. I was already riding the elevator up to my penthouse, ice pressed against my cheek, but I heard later how the mood curdled. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Some whispered about calling drivers early. Others, clutching champagne glasses, looked at my parents with something harsher than judgment, pity mixed with disgust. Brian's family were the first to react. His mother stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "We're leaving," she announced to no one in particular, but loud enough for everyone to hear. His father followed, muttering something about understanding what kind of family we're marrying into. The groom looked as though someone had yanked the floor out from under him. Within the hour, news trickled in through texts and calls. 3 of my father's largest clients had seen the live stream. One messaged directly, "Richard, I'm disturbed by what I just watched. We need to review our contract." Another simply wrote, "This partnership is over. I don't do business with men who hit their children." The dominoes were falling, one by one. The empire my father had built on respectability was collapsing under the weight of a single slap, magnified by 200 witnesses and 1,000 screens. At the same time, the internet was rewriting the narrative. Where in the ballroom I had been painted as selfish, online I was recast as the daughter who refused to be bullied. The hashtags trended faster than anyone expected. #Penthouse ambush, #stand with Madison. A screenshot of my mother mid-swing, her face twisted with rage, circulated alongside captions like, "And they called her selfish." By midnight, the video had been shared across business circles, advocacy groups, and even feminist blogs. People I had never met were calling me brave, while others dissected the moment as a textbook case of toxic family dynamics. What my parents thought was humiliation had turned into a rallying cry. Back at the Grandview Hotel, the wedding was imploding. The string quartet packed up early, the photographer quietly slipped away, and guests began to vanish table by table. Sophia's perfect day was dissolving like sugar in water. Her tears no longer drew sympathy. They looked staged against the backdrop of her parents' scheming. Even Brian, by the end of the night, was shaking his head in disbelief, muttering that he hadn't signed up for this circus. And my mother, proud, unyielding Carol Hayes, was carried out by paramedics after fainting when she realized who Marcus Chen really was. For a woman who spent her life orchestrating appearances, there could be no greater humiliation than collapsing on the very stage she tried to command. The truth was simple, undeniable, and now unavoidable. In trying to strip me of my sanctuary, my family had dismantled their own. I woke the next morning in my penthouse, the city glowing beneath my windows like a field of embers. My cheek still bore the faint sting of the slap, but the ache was strangely grounding. It reminded me that I had not dreamed it, that my mother's hand, the gasps, the earring flying across marble, were real. Yet alongside that pain there was something else, a lightness, as if 32 years of invisible weight had finally lifted. By mid-morning, Marcus called me into his office. He didn't bother with small talk. "The board wants to promote you," he said, his tone matter-of-fact but his eyes gleaming. "Senior Vice President of Global Operations." I blinked, because I got slapped at a wedding. "Because you didn't crumble," Marcus corrected. "You protected company assets. You held composure under public duress. You leveraged resources without losing dignity. That's leadership, Madison. The kind most people never show until it's too late." The promotion came with more than a title. A 40% raise, stock options, influence that stretched across continents, enough to buy another penthouse if I wanted, though I didn't. The one I had was more than enough, not just in square feet but in meaning. And with the bonus, I made a choice that surprised even me. I donated it to a women's shelter that helped survivors of family abuse rebuild their lives. It felt right, almost necessary. If I had been given the privilege of clawing my way to sanctuary, I wanted others to know they could too. Still, I didn't stop there. I called building security, handed them a list of names permanently banned from my property. My parents' names were at the top. The doorman, James, who had greeted me for years, pulled me aside. "I saw the video," he said softly. "Good for you. My daughter went through something similar. Family isn't always family, you know." His words landed like a benediction, a stranger's affirmation of what I had always feared was weakness, choosing distance. Yet distance became power. I blocked my parents on social media, not with ceremony but with quiet finality. I didn't owe them explanation or apology. Their absence was not a wound, it was a healing. And while the internet turned the slap into a meme, my professional world turned it into a milestone. 5 recruiters called within the week, headhunters eager to pull me into their firms. My assistant laughed as she relayed the offers. "Apparently standing up to toxic family is trending," she teased. I laughed too, genuinely, the sound feeling unfamiliar but welcome in my own throat. That week, Marcus invited me to dinner with his wife and daughters. Over roasted chicken and laughter, his eldest looked at me and said, "You're proof we don't have to shrink ourselves for anyone." I realized then that the family I was building didn't share my blood, but they gave me something rarer, respect. It struck me that revenge wasn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it was this, a steady life, lived well, lived freely, lived without apology. The Penthouse, once just a monument to my career, had become something greater, a declaration, proof that boundaries can be beautiful, that saying no can echo longer than any forced yes. Marcus was right. The best revenge wasn't destroying them. It was thriving without them. The public apology came exactly 47 hours later, just as Marcus had demanded. It arrived not with sincerity, but with the stiffness of words wrung out by lawyers. My father's statement appeared in a local business journal. "I apologize to my daughter, Madison Hayes, for my inappropriate behavior at a recent family event. I acknowledge her professional achievements and her right to her own property. This matter is now closed." It was clipped, bloodless, the kind of apology that tasted more like paperwork than repentance. But still, it was a fracture in the armor of a man who had never bent for anyone, least of all me. My mother, of course, refused. She turned instead to social media, posting long tirades about her ungrateful daughter, calling me selfish, accusing me of being corrupted by corporate culture. Within hours, screenshots of her posts were circulating, often with captions like, "And now we know where the problem started." The comments sections were merciless. "Classic narcissistic parent. This woman literally slapped her daughter at a wedding and still thinks she's the victim. If the slap had been the spark, her rants were gasoline." Sophia's marriage unraveled almost as quickly as her perfect wedding had. The counseling sessions Brian's family demanded revealed cracks deeper than anyone wanted to admit. Her entitlement, her reliance on appearances, her inability to accept responsibility. 4 months later, their divorce papers were signed quietly, almost as though the world already knew the ending. She texted me once, late at night, "I hope you're happy you got what you wanted." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I got what I earned, there's a difference." Our extended family split into camps. Some sided with my parents, parroting the old mantra that family should always come first. Others reached out privately, their messages trembling with honesty. My cousin Derek, once so quick to mock, wrote, "I didn't know they treated you like that all the time. I'm sorry." Aunt Patricia confessed, "Your mother is my sister, but she was wrong. I'm proud of you for standing up." The most surprising message came from Brian himself. "I didn't know about the ambush," he wrote. "I would have stopped it if I had. Sophia needs to grow up, and maybe this is the wake-up call she needs. I'm sorry about your mom hitting you. That was assault, plain and simple." Even in his words, there was a clarity my own parents lacked. Meanwhile, my father's company bled. Contracts were canceled, expansions stalled. His empire, once so stable, now teetered. Clients didn't want to align themselves with a man whose violence had gone viral. It was no longer just business, it was character, and his had been revealed under the harshest spotlight imaginable. In the quiet of my penthouse, with the city glittering below, I felt something I'd never known before. Not triumph, something calmer. Release. As if at last, I had stepped out from under a shadow I'd been told was permanent. And while my parents clung to their scripts, raging against the consequences, I no longer needed them to rewrite mine. Hayes Capital became my refuge, and strangely, my family. Not the family bound by blood, but the one forged in trust and respect. Colleagues who had once seen me only across boardroom tables began inviting me to their homes, introducing me to their children, treating me as more than the woman who never left the office. At Marcus's dinner table, his wife pulled me into conversations about books and recipes. His daughters asked me about ambition without apology in their voices. "You're proof," the eldest said one evening, "that women don't have to shrink to fit into someone else's idea of enough." That sentence meant more than any reluctant apology my father ever gave. It was around that time that I sent Sophia her wedding gift, long after the chaos had cooled but the wounds were still raw. A white envelope, crisp, unassuming. Inside, a certificate for 6 months of family therapy sessions. I knew what she would think, that it was a slight, an insult wrapped in courtesy. But for me, it wasn't mockery, it was an offering, an acknowledgement that while wealth could buy roses and ballrooms, only humility could repair fractures. Her response came swiftly, a text at midnight, bitter as vinegar. "This is insulting." I typed back, "It's necessary." Then I blocked the number. The truth was, I had stopped needing their approval. What I wanted was something larger, to live without flinching every time my phone lit up with their names. To wake up and know the only voices waiting for me were ones that respected me. In many ways, that certificate had been less a gift to Sophia than it was a mirror, one she could either look into or turn face down. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my new role. Senior VP of Global Operations wasn't just a title. It was a responsibility that stretched across 12 countries, a chance to leave my fingerprints on projects that mattered. Every trip, every strategy session, every late-night call was no longer just about climbing higher. It was about building something with meaning, free of the chains of proving myself to the people who refused to see me. And in the sanctuary of my penthouse, I began to breathe differently. The silence wasn't loneliness anymore. It was peace. The walls no longer echoed with invisibility, they hummed with resilience. For the first time in my life, I felt at home. 6 months later, the city knew my name not because of scandal, but because of success. Forbes published its 40 under 40 list, and there I was, Madison Hayes, Senior VP of Global Operations at Hayes Capital. The article didn't mention the slap, the live stream, or the ballroom fiasco. It focused instead on the deals I had brokered, the expansion strategies I had designed, the markets I had opened. For once, the spotlight was on what I had built, not what I had endured. Meanwhile, my father's company limped along. Without Marcus's capital, without the confidence of clients, the grand expansion he had been planning dissolved into dust. He looked older, thinner, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of something heavier than years. Through mutual contacts, I heard he had started therapy. Too late for me, perhaps, but not too late for him to face the mirror. My mother doubled down. At church luncheons, charity galas, and anywhere she could find an audience, she painted herself as the victim of an ungrateful daughter who chose money over family. But the problem with lies is that they shrivel under the light. Most people had already seen the video. They knew better. Whispered sympathy turned into polite distance. Invitations to galas dried up. Where she once commanded rooms, she now lingered at the edges, ignored. And Sophia, poor Sophia, found that her fairy tale had dissolved faster than the flowers from her bouquet. Counseling revealed truths she couldn't outrun, her dependence, her entitlement, her refusal to take responsibility. Brian's family had been right to pause. The marriage ended quietly after 4 months, but the silence of the divorce was louder than any applause at her wedding. She texted me once more. "I hope you're happy. You got what you wanted." I looked at the message, then out at the city skyline, the glass towers gleaming like polished steel. My reply was short, final. "I got what I earned. There's a difference." The extended family, once eager spectators at the ballroom spectacle, grew quieter. Some avoided me out of loyalty to my parents. Others reached out in cautious solidarity. I no longer cared to sort them into categories. Family ties, I'd learned, were fragile threads if not woven with respect. At night, in my penthouse, I would stand before the windows and let the city lights pour over me. The same lights I had fought for, sacrificed for, wept for. The same lights they tried to take from me. Each flicker was a reminder. I had not just survived, I had remade myself. The past still echoed, but no longer dictated. My mother's handprint had faded from my cheek long ago. What lingered instead was the imprint of resilience. Every morning now, I stand at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse with a cup of coffee in hand. The sun rises slowly, gilding the city in light, and I breathe easier knowing this space. This sanctuary remains mine. Not because it was given to me, not because I begged for it, but because I fought for it. I've learned that blood does not guarantee respect. That family, if it demands your silence and your sacrifice while giving nothing in return, is not family at all. Respect is what makes people kin. Dignity is what makes life worth living. And peace, your peace, is not something you should bargain away for anyone's approval. For years, I thought choosing myself would mean losing everything. But the truth is simpler and far more powerful. When you choose yourself, you discover who truly chooses you in return. Hayes Capital became my family. Marcus became the father figure my own father never managed to be. His daughters reminded me that ambition is not a flaw but a flame. And the people who cheered for me, strangers online or colleagues who quietly said, "I see you," they proved that support sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. The slap at the wedding was meant to humiliate me. Instead, it set me free. Because sometimes, life hands you a moment that burns so brightly, it destroys the old script and forces you to write a new one. Mine is written in resilience, in boundaries drawn, in mornings filled with light that no one can take away. To anyone listening who has ever felt invisible in their own family, who has been told they are too much or not enough, your story matters. Your boundaries matter. And your success belongs to you, not to those who tried to diminish it. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. Your time, your presence, and your willingness to walk alongside these words mean more than I can say. I wish you health. I wish you peace. And above all, I wish you a family. By blood or by choice, that sees you clearly and loves you well. Until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other.